Hi, I'm Tom, and in this video I'm going to be finishing an orc terrain project that I started last October. It is a scratch build where I try to really crank up the level of detail to try and match the official Citadel terrain, or at least not have it stick out like a sore thumb when on a table. And also just doing some creative stuff. Making terrain is very relaxing, at least in my book, and making anything orc related is fun because the rules are different. You can turn off your brain a little bit when it comes to logic, and also with the quality of your painting, because in the end it was probably just a grot that painted it with an angry orc with a squake behind him. So don't expect too thin coats or great brush control under that kind of duress. So it was a bit of an experiment along with a challenge that I set for myself of finishing my orc army. Sadly, I caught a nasty flu during October last year, so I didn't quite reach the goals that I had, but I figured even with a busy month of October this year, I would try and finish some of it. If you want to see some of the conversions that I did last year, there is a playlist on the info cards or in the description. Let's get into the build itself here. So some of the footage is quite dated. Like I said, it was recorded over a year ago, and I wasn't as mindful of a bunch of things when it comes to recording and making it look nice. I used various materials for the construction of this project. I didn't end up using the foam core in here. I almost entirely used plastic card, which was a new material to me, but I found a local architecture school that sold this in a shop for their students. And it's a wonderful material. It's a styrene plastic, so your plastic glue works on it. Anyway, the materials I got here are different thickness of plastic card, and these plastic card shapes an L shape and an I-beam sort of shape. And I also got some corrugated cardboard for that classic corrugated sheet metal look. A lot of this build is experimental, and I will go through some of the roads that I tried to take but didn't quite work out, share my lessons and my future plans for those techniques in other builds. I should mention that this is not only an orc related build. You could very easily use this stuff for Necromunda. Personally, I would love to get into Necromunda. I'm having a bit of a hard time finding the time for it and the people that actually want to play it. These techniques would work perfectly for that, and had I not specifically orc branded the couple of buildings that I make in this video, they could easily be used in a Necromunda game. Perhaps they still could, with cleverly covering up some stuff. So my plan for the first building that I want to do is an orc gun shop, where a mech would stand behind the counter. You can go there and cash in your teeth and buy some DACA for it. But I also end up a year later, this year, 2024, making a small addition to it because the crafting process was very fun and I didn't just want to use the footage of the old stuff. So you'll see me make one more building and I kind of love it. I also got some bits from various orc vehicles and kits with some orc glyphs on it, and the usual bits from Imperial terrain kits. You'll see me use a couple of those too to tie it into the universe. Onto the construction itself. My idea here, as a novice with this material, was to make a nice set of cutouts for all the walls, the roofs, and work from there, and then trash it. I found out later with my second building, and as I get along with this project, that things can happen a little bit more organically if I just snap it instead of cut it. Of course, if you're making stuff that's non-Orky or non-Necromunda super underhive stuff, then you might want to cut it and have right angles and all that sort of stuff. But for this project, not needed. I'm using some different greenskins for measurements here. A knob, a boy, and a grot. These guys are on the wrong base size these days because that was changed a couple of editions ago. But I do have some on 32mm bases, and I do use those to check things out. I did have an idea to incorporate this guy behind the counter from a vehicle sprue. You can briefly see him here when I'm measuring stuff. Sadly, I didn't get to make him this time because I want to try and get this video out by the end of October. I'm not sure if I'm successful because I'm recording this voiceover 2 days before the end of October and I still haven't painted it yet. So I'm kind of winging it, and I hope I have enough time to edit it. But of course you'll know if I made it or not. If not, it'll just be an Orky terrain video. I'm cutting out the opening for the storefront where the mech can serve his customers and display his wares. I do have some intact guns that are not held in hands from, I would say, 3rd or 4th edition Warhammer 40k. before they sort of optimized the Orc Boy kit, and those would be very nice to display in the shop front. Sadly, I won't get to that in this video, but I do have some on an objective base. And I'll probably put that on there for the beauty shots at the end. But in time, I will make the shopkeep and have some wares to display. On to orcifying these right angles. This plastic art stuff is amazing. If you just take a hobby knife and sort of just chip away at it, it gives a, I'm not sure if I would say realistic metal texture to it, but certainly a texture that sort of matches what Warhammer Orky metal looks like. And as long as you take care of not cutting yourself and you can just chip away at it. Here it's still sort of right angles and the building is kind of that in the end, but I try to make it uneven anyway. Measuring out for a door and some windows. Want to have sort of a window on the side where when the store is closed you can walk up there and, you know, contact the shopkeep anyway. Not sure what that is called. I'm cutting in a hole for the roof where you can access the top level via a ladder. I'm using one from the truck kit here as an example of a ladder. I'm also making the roof removable, so if you're doing some kind of gameplay with this and need to get models in and out of the building, that you can lift off the roof of the building to access the inside. It's not super practical and you would rarely use this function, especially in modern 40k. For Necromunda or Kill Team, sure. But also it's a proof of concept and it motivated me to have this functionality, so that's why I did it. It also enables me to use the roof as just a piece of scrap metal in other scenarios. We're finally at a point where I can sort of lay out the pieces of the building in an unwrapped sort of fashion, just to get a sense of the size of it and whatnot. And here I'm sort of playing with the idea of putting on these iconic scrap metal pieces that are covering up holes or holding stuff together, or just displaying trophies off of, you know, Imperial vehicles or whatnot, whatever they looted it from, those particular armor plates, or enhance the Orky aesthetics. They might find that sort of style of construction beautiful, who knows. But to make this look more ramshackle, I go from having an intact piece to purposely making it into a jigsaw puzzle that I will bind together with these pieces of scrap metal. And of course the connecting faces, I will make sure they look like they don't come from the same piece by texturing that up with the metal texturing technique that I've done on the edges. And I just keep doing the same thing, destroying these intact pieces into a larger jigsaw puzzle. I'm also putting in some holes, be it from rust or impact damage from a shell or whatever it might have been. Maybe this side of the building came from a vehicle that got hit by a shell and penetrated it, and the orcs used part of that vehicle as this building. I've made some holes, indents, both with knife and a drill bit to be bullet impacts or just general deformities in the metal. I think it turned out very well to do that, so it's not just a flat side. Sure, some of it will be a flat slab of metal from whatever they looted it from, but some of it will also have deformations, and I think that worked out very nicely on this test piece. At this point, we can see that it's getting a little bit more scrappy and starting to come together. And I can start patching it together with those bits of scrap metal that I've made, sort of fixing the jigsaw puzzle. To make this structurally sound for the non-Orky world that we live in, I'm cutting some of the I-beams and L-shaped pieces of plastic art into sizes that I can use to glue the building together with and to add visual fidelity so that the building isn't just made up of flat pieces of metal. You might have also noticed that I have cut out a sign that says Daka. Of course the orcs would need to know what kind of shop this is. I was toying with doing it in Orky glyphs because they do have an alphabet and writing it in that, but I thought for this project I'd just use our letters that says Daka. I've also put on some of these teeth that make it look very iconically Orky. Time to do a bit of a test fit here. It isn't easy, but with these L-shaped stuff to hold the roof in place, we're slowly getting there. I think at this point it's starting to come together and look kind of nice, if I have to say so myself. But we're not done yet. To really sell that merchant vibe and market stall vibe, I'm putting sort of an awning over the cashier's area so it looks like a market stand. I might paint this up in the iconic stripy pattern that you associate market stalls with in a fantasy setting, but I also might make it checkerboard pattern to really sell that Orky thing. Here I'm also trying on some bits from various Citadel kits, just to tie it in to the universe and to add some finer details. I also wanted to add a bunch of micro detail to sort of set the scale of this building in context. And for this I thought I was being smart. I didn't research a whole lot, so I just went with an idea that I had of making this press mold from scratch in 3D, since that's something that I do, and using Milliput to put in there. There are some rivets, some bolts, some nuts, some vents, some lights, some pipes, some plates, and some teeth, you know, Orky stuff. But this first iteration wasn't flexible enough to allow the Milliput to get out of the mold again, even with using some oil as a mold release agent. I do think that if I flip it around, instead of being a mold that I inserted into, instead of having an innie mold, I make it an outie mold, you know, where the things pop out. I print that, press that into some blue stuff, and then put the Milliput into the blue stuff, which is flexible. I think I can do that, but that'll be for a future project. And I made this texture roller too for doing a diamond pattern. So this was the state that I left it at for a year. I never got it finished because I currently don't play 40k, so there was no need for it. And there still kind of isn't, but I really wanted to finish it. And it was a nice thing to wrap up from my unfinished business pile. Even at this stage, I think it's looking very nice, but I still wanted to tackle some of that micro detail. And I had this idea of using the thin plastic card and a hole punch that I've used a million times before for some leather work, because I do Viking reenactment stuff, so I do a lot of leather work for that, and just put the hole punch on the lowest setting, and in 2 minutes tops I had all the rivets that I needed for this entire building, and there were hundreds of them. It was very quick to do so. So I just dabbed a couple of drops of plastic glue where I wanted a rivet, making sure to make it uneven and make it look interesting, and just put it on there. For micro detail, they're probably still a little bit too big compared to stuff on Citadel kits, but I might be able to find a hole punch with a smaller hole and it'll be perfect for the next one. But this certainly does read like it, if not on video then in person, and at distance too, so that's helpful. It didn't take that long to do so. I just sat down and did this for the whole building. And since it was this easy and I made the building so that I could look inside, I even did the inside. Maybe not all of it, but the most relevant parts. I even put some on some of the official Citadel parts just to tie those in. Like a part of a tank's ventilation system was riveted onto this building using the same technique that they used to bolt everything else together. But I didn't want to stop there, so I'm making a little bit of an outhouse here. Not that I think that the orcs would consider the need of privacy when they get rid of their waste, but I thought it would be a fun thing, and orcs are nothing if not fun. So I used a new orc boy for scale here, and instead of making a jigsaw puzzle this time, both because I wanted it to be quick and also just to try a different technique, I just slapped on stuff on top of the flat panels, and I think it worked out very nicely. So a little bit of trivia, and I think a cool thing. I didn't research this too much, so take it with a pinch of salt, but apparently the story goes that outhouses in ye olden time had a star for male outhouses and a crescent moon for female outhouses. And females would take better care of the outhouses, they would be nicer and stuff. So at some point it was just the crescent moon because that symbolized, the nicer ones. Not because orcs are male or female, they're fungi, doesn't matter, we're not getting into that. I just thought crescent moon and orcs? Oh yeah, bad moons. So yeah, there's a bad moon symbol on this outhouse. I thought that was kind of funny. So using mostly the same techniques and done in very short amount of time, honestly. I had a blast making this and I honestly want to make more. I just don't have an excuse to make more at the moment, unless I get into 40k or Necromunda. Except for one thing, I do play Horus Heresy, and you could certainly argue that some of the battles in the Horus Heresy could take place on a battlefield or battlefront where an expeditionary fleet has just fought or previously have fought orcs there. That's not implausible at all. Anyway, I don't need to justify it. This video is about making fun terrain, and if I want to make more of it, I'm sure I'll find an excuse for it. If not, probably next year around this time. So I'm assembling this, and while I ideally want to have an internal structure to it where you can see stuff, I didn't have the time for it. So I just try to cover up some of the larger seams with some pieces of scrap metal on the inside. And I finally got a chance to use some of this corrugated cardboard, both on this, and I went back and added a couple of pieces to the other building, both to tie them together and to give some variety of textures used on the building. And the door here, it's not realistic at all, but it reads as a door. Like, there are no hinges, wouldn't conceivably open inside that space, and doesn't look like it opens outside. But it's a piece of wargaming terrain, it's okay. Here it is, all riveted up and with a quick makeshift lock and handle for the door as well. This also gave me the chance to use Mod Podge for the first time. I just slapped on a layer over all the corrugated sections, and this lives up to the hype. It basically just turned it into a hard surface that I could prime and not worry about the paint soaking into it and looking weird. So awesome stuff, but most of you already knew that probably. Here we are, pre-priming, ready for some paint. I think it turned out very nicely, just the building part of it. Could argue that the shacks look a bit flimsy and there's not a lot of depth to it. I do have thicker plastic card and I do have foam core and whatnot to make the buildings thicker. Like I said, this was me getting into it and seeing what I could do with the level of detail. I'm sure I'll get into more projects and making it more realistic in the future. Here I got it primed up. Don't worry too much about the mottled look. I had a plan of doing a black primer, but the cheap black primer I had ran out midway through it, as you can probably tell, and then I used a bit of gray, and also this mottled look might help me in the painting stage. I was planning on doing a bit of sponging and stippling for textures over top of it, but I used the awesome metal paint from the airbrush line of Vallejo, and it just covered too well and I didn't want to dry brush that on. But it did go on fairly thin, so you can still see sort of that texture underneath it. Then onto painting the panels, I simply take some primary colors and just stipple and dab and paint ugly on purpose the individual plates, but not go all the way out to the edges. This makes it look like the plates have been worn on the edges from wherever they came from, or from when they were plasma cut apart or whatever they were. After I've gone through and done a bunch of primary colors, here, there, and everywhere, I add a couple of fun details like a checker pattern, a couple of places to make it orky and to match my orcs that are mostly goths, I would say. Here I applied a homemade wash made up of equal parts brown and black ink, and then some matte medium and some water mixed to a consistency that works for the project. After that, I stippled some lighter versions of the colors onto the plates using a sponge at first, and then just an old brush and some stippling and dabbing motions to give it a bit of highlight and more texture and nuances. I added a couple more colors to the front of the building in between shots, as I thought it needed it. Here's a dry brush of a lighter silver to catch some of the edges and add some wear and tear by some stippling. I decided to draw on some graffiti on the door of the outhouse. I had a little bit of an accident while drawing this orc. Sort of looks like he has a comb over, and I'm kind of thankful that I didn't make the nose hole bigger with that black dot. Sort of looks like Orc Hitler. I swear it's an accident, but I left it. Thought it was kind of funny. Maybe it's a disgruntled Grot that made a bit of graffiti of his orc bully overlords. And then I do some rust effects. First with some Ryza Rust, it adds a nice bit of color variety. And then some Typhus Corrosion. I especially slapped this on the outhouse to make it look extra nasty. And some general dirt and weathering. I do this trick where I dry brush a color that I use on my models from the bottom of the building to tie it into the terrain, make it look like it's been there for a while. I think it turned out very nice, and I think it fit the brief that I set for myself of matching the Citadel terrain pretty well. I have loads of things I would love to make, like one of those watchtowers from Dawn of War in this sort of style, or a vehicle shop that incorporates some of the other Citadel parts. I sort of regret not having time to finish a couple of characters for this, but I've put some guys from my collection in here, even though their paint job is a little bit out of date compared to what I do nowadays. So a Big Mac behind the counter, and this guy is clearly unsatisfied with something. Maybe he wants his teeth back from a faulty product that he purchased. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I've certainly enjoyed making it in 2 sessions set a year apart. If you're one of those lovely people that have subscribed to me, liked this video, or comments on them, I genuinely thank you. It means a lot to me. I'm a small channel, it's just me doing my hobby, and if that somehow inspired you to interact with what I make, then that means a lot to me, so thank you. And I hope to see you in another video or a past video. Go check out some of my other stuff if you like this one. Until next time, cheers.